Yours, Sue. The film has been made like 15, a bit more than 15 years ago.
I think it was
8.
1997
7 or 8?
or 8, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
Have you seen it again since
Well,
then?
I saw it in I saw it in a couple of festivals. It premiered in Toronto and then it went to Berlin and so on. I didn't really see it other than in festivals when I was forced to see it, because I don't like to look at movies I've done, because you sit in the editing room and work on it for like 100 years, so afterwards to voluntarily see it again. And also because originally I planned for it to be like a really funny comedy, but it became a very, very tragic movie, so I said, all right, I don't have to see this, but I don't know. It was probably the best experience I ever had, because I was attempting to do a completely different movie and not succeeding in raising the money and so on. And all of a sudden, I met Anna Thompson in an audition for that other movie, and something about her, I don't know, caught my imagination and so on. And I sat like in about 3 or 4 days, and I wrote 40 pages of a thing that I called Sue, and I gave it to Anna, and Anna, we sat in her living room, and she said, let's make it, and I said, okay, and I actually put half of the money for the shooting of the movie, which was almost all my savings, which was, I think, people question my sanity, but I couldn't raise any money. Anna Thompson and I worked in a really very unusual way, because she put up some of the money also, and basically it was the two of us and some money of her friends, and we shot the movie, and she brought, almost all the actors were actor friends of hers, because she's been in New York for a long time, and people really didn't get paid practically anything. And it was a great working experience. I never had anything like this. Obviously, I made 4 movies with Anna, but I never had such a, she's not an easy person, but I never had such a smooth collaboration for 4 movies with her without ever having any difficulty at all. We just like decided we were going to shoot, all of those 4 movies, and we went ahead, and she spent money and I spent money, and it was like that. Anna looked so fragile and so vulnerable when I met her. She has this very small physique, except for her breasts. But she's very, very skinny, and she has those big blue eyes, and so that captured my I don't know, that kind of capped what I used to know, and I even dated some women who at the age of about 30, they were like beautiful and successful and everything, and I met them 10 years later, and they were like fallen women. They had no career, they had no family, they had no husbands, and this was all in New York, and I felt was something about the city where if you didn't grasp the opportunity and, let's say, got married when you were young and so on, you all of a sudden lost, like you were lost. And Anna, who was not one of those characters, but who looked like all of them or more so, was the ideal ideal actress to play it, in my opinion. But I think that the thing that is true about all those films is that it's fringe women, but it's also women whose I think destiny is their lives are predestined by how they were born, to whom they were born, and what were their like very early childhood. And I think this is more true about women than men. I think men sometimes grow in really difficult homes and difficult surroundings, but for some reason they can break through and become President Obama. I don't know, they can become all kinds of things. But women, I think usually when they have like very bad childhood, they don't go anywhere good, and in the end, a lot of times they die. Kind of. I think this is more something to do with the way women are in the society than men. People always ask me, why are you making those very, very depressing movies about women who live a horrible life and then they also die? So I made her live a horrible life, but then also live, and kind of, so that was a switch. I should say, first of all, that I love New York. It's my favorite city in the world, but and a lot of people say that, and there are a lot of people who hate it, and it's for the same reason. You can be totally isolated there. You can die somewhere, and nobody will know for weeks or months. You never know. You almost never know your neighbors. Like I come from Israel, where the minute you move into an apartment, all the neighbors of the neighborhood come and they say hello and they have coffee, and it's too much like that. But in New York, there's zero of this. It's like nobody knows the next door neighbors, and there's a lot of anonymity. I came from Israel. You know, my father was mayor of Jerusalem. Blah blah blah. I felt, and the city was also, you know, much smaller, obviously, than New York, and much more like personally. You knew people personally. When I came to New York, I said, now I can be whoever I want. Nobody's going to say, what is Amos Kollek doing this or that, because nobody recognized me. And the energy of the city is like so overwhelming that even now, every time I come to New York, I feel the same excitement that I felt the first time when you start seeing the skyscrapers and all of that. There's something mesmerizing to me about this, which I don't feel about anywhere else in the world. The thing about New York that I also like, strangely enough, but is the isolation and the anonymity of every person there. You can be like a really famous, I don't know why, for some reason I'm thinking about Philip Seymour Hoffman, who just died, and obviously very tragically, but it also took a long time until anybody realized it. And I was thinking about afterwards, like, how is it possible that a person like this with 3 children and a kind of not exactly a wife, but something like this, that it takes so long for people to even realize that he's not well. So there's something about New York that I've never seen anywhere else. So that what I'm trying to say is that you see all of that in Sue in a very. I wasn't going to like go for the exterior shots of seeing this skyline of Manhattan because everybody knows it and you see it in every postcard and so on. I was trying to show the life of the individual. I mean, this specific individual that was Sue.
It brings me to the aesthetic of the film, the stylistic aspects. So a lot of critics talked about the documentary aspects of the film. So I wanted to know how much was written and how much was improvisation, how much you used the context and maybe the people that were there in order to create this film.
There was no improvisation, and every word that was spoken was scripted. A lot of people ask me this, and I never kind of understand exactly why, because this was a very scripted film, and actually all my films, I don't improvise. Stylistically, what was done, and part of it was to save money, frankly, but also because I thought it fitted the movie, is that it was all handheld. So the cameraman kind of followed the people, and also we did no rehearsals. In other words, we shot the first rehearsal, and that was it usually. You know, I made a movie with Hannah Shigula years before, and which I didn't think I did very well, and she took me aside one day and she said, you know, Fassbinder, when he had the scene in the first shot, he never covered it or he never shot it again for safety or anything. And I couldn't do it at the time, but in Sue, I decided I would try to do it in the first shot. And it was really kind of quite strange because we went, it was a roof shot, and it was the opening shot. So I said action, and there was Anna there, and the camera, and I said cut, and I said, okay, let's go downstairs and shoot the next scene. And nobody moved, not a single person moved, and I realized that they said it's impossible. He doesn't want to cover it more, but this is when I listened to Hannah Shigola years after the fact. I felt in Sue it was self-explanatory. I thought the woman was very clear, and her deterioration was also clear. And there was something the way Anna played her, was she was very proud. So she was too proud to ask for any help, and even though she was going down the drain, she would not really accept anybody's help. Fiona was a more complicated movie because I actually wrote 16 pages, and from that I kind of developed the script, and I felt that it needed a little bit of like a background voice to sort of fill in the gaps, because we also shot, like the first couple of days we shot, we went to some crack den, I would say, basically, where there were several hookers, and we shot just like whatever happened. In other words, Anna joined them, and for some reason, even though they were all smoking crack, and whenever they gave her the pipe, she held it like this. When you hold a crack pipe, you have to hold like this, because otherwise the whole thing falls out. But they didn't notice it for some reason, so they were sure that she was like a hooker like them. And apparently she says she was a stripper. I don't know if it's true. I mean, had been a stripper before, so she could very well relate to them. And so let's say those scenes in the beginning were really just whatever happened, because, for instance, we shot, and all of a sudden a few crack dealers walked in, and they walked into the shot, and then they looked and they saw that they were being filmed, and they freaked out. And so things like this happened all the time, and I felt like when we were cutting it that it had to have a through line that would have to be kind of a voiceover. Hitchcock planned every shot, and to the most extreme, I think, that any director did. Well, this was the opposite. This was just like, okay, let's shoot a rehearsal. It was interesting because I felt like I had to say to Anna at some point that I hate rehearsals, because I could never stand rehearsals. And she had worked with Clint Eastwood on Unforgiven, and she said to me, Clint Eastwood always shot the first rehearsal, never had any rehearsals. So, and I also was on a set of one of Woody Allen's movies, and I realized I always thought that the director had to actually do something, but then I realized if you had a good script and good actors, all you had to do was, in a way, let them do it and get out of the way, and not try to over-instruct them and say, this is what you're feeling now, you're remembering your mother, and you feel so sad and all that. So I never did anything like this. We had good actors, and we just shot. So that was it. I was not trying to, I think I had some influence of Woody Allen in my life in general, and, a certain kind of humor that obviously doesn't show in all those depressing movies, but it does exist. And the movies that impressed me the most were the most unlike, for instance, The Deer Hunter was a movie that impressed me. Not Michael Cimino, but that particular movie impressed me a lot, and it had obviously nothing to do stylistically or any other way with this movie. So I can't say. A lot of people ask me, were you very influenced by Cassavetes and stuff like this? And really not. The only thing is Fassbinder. There was a period when I was in my 20s and I was in New York, and there was one theater that has long been gone that showed all of Fassbinder movies. And I used to go, and I was very impressed with the fact that he made like 3 movies a year, and he basically, he died very young, and he's made quite a lot of movies, and he did them very fast, and I thought, well, this can be done. And this was the way we did Sue. It was, I think, 14 days of shooting, and in a way, it was easy. It was amazingly easy to make this movie. We shot Sue, finished it. My wife and I looked at it, and we said, well, it's nothing special, so we didn't we didn't succeed, and we went back to Israel. And the day before we went back to Israel, for some reason, I put it in an envelope to the Toronto Film Festival, which I barely knew what it was about, but somebody told me to do it, so I did it. And all of a sudden in Jerusalem, I get a call, and they say, well, we want Sue. And Sue was not finished editing even, it was kind of in a rough cut form. So I went to New York, and then I managed to raise money because it was Toronto. So I raised a little money. We finished the sound editing and the edit, and basically, we made the print. And actually, one of the co-producers, on the day of the first shooting, he came with a second reel because it wasn't ready. So he came like about an hour before the thing, and it was a complete surprise for me that. And in the beginning, I also didn't really think that much because, you see a festival, and I didn't know festivals. But on the plane, I read in the newspapers that Sue was had a big buzz about it in Toronto, and we also got a sales agent in Toronto that then sold the movie in Berlin like hotcakes. So it was a very pleasant surprise.
Thank you. Who the hell wants to be John Cassavetes? Who the hell wants to be Woody Allen? I'd rather be Clint Eastwood. And this line is actually spoken by our guest
Yes.
in the film. So, and I also know that you had a book in 1995 called Approximately Clint Eastwood. So could you elaborate a little about that line, please?
Does this work? Okay. I don't see that this line needs elaborating. Obviously, who is there anybody here? I'm talking about the men, I guess, who wouldn't prefer to be Clint Eastwood to be Woody than. You wouldn't? All right. That's. I don't know what to say about this. That's strange enough. But no, I grew up wanting to look like a real movie star. This was way before I was a director, and actually I went to a shrink for a few years because I told them, I decided to be involved in movies so I was not interested in directing, I was not interested in any of this. I wanted to be like a movie star and look like Clint Eastwood. So the shrink, the director, the psychologist, after a while of this, she said, but don't you think there's something strange about what you're saying? And I said, no, absolutely not. She said, but have you looked in the mirror? And I said, every time I shave, I do, but I try not to see. And she says, well, but do you think that because you will appear on the screen, you'll all of a sudden look like Clint Eastwood? And I said, of course. And she said that's a very strange thing coming from a 40-year-old man, and that's about it. I don't know what else to say. No, I very much appreciate the huge talent that's there. Woody Allen. I'm less a Cassavetes person. I've not even seen all his movies. I don't think I've seen half of them, actually. But Woody Allen was, had a big influence on me, especially with his sense of humor, I would say. Now he's in the news in some weird way.
Yes.
So I'm not going to refer to that.
Well, you will see that in this film, but you're allowing yourself an opening a la Clint Eastwood, with even a sort of Sergio Leone kind of. There's a lot of humor in the film. You will see. So, I mean, in your films, we are meeting, and in your most personal films, we are always meeting very fascinating, interesting women. Is it something that drove you from the start? Like, I would say, a teenager who takes on a guitar or a drum kit saying, well, I will get girls by being in a band. I mean, is it something linked to that?
Yeah, but it's weird. I think I'm the only director I know that never tried to make a pass at an actress, and at the same time, it's the only reason I got into movies is to have
Oh,
and
okay.
I cast like actresses because I said this sounds good. I should have a lot of pretty actresses in the movie, and then I proceeded to be. Everybody else was like the assistant director. They were all like having affairs with the actresses, and I said no, but I'm a director. I cannot like succumb to this. So it was contradiction. It was completely contradictory. In other words, I went to the movies, A, to look like Clint Eastwood, didn't work out, and to pick up all the actresses, never touched it. I was, yeah, a disappointment to myself for sure, yeah.
You came to filmmaking through being a writer in the first place. Um, would you say that there was a clicking moment when you sort of knew that you wanted to go into filmmaking? Or was it a slow process, or maybe a process of coincidences or invitations?
No, I actually was always into making a movie, but I met a producer in my father's house, and Ray Stark, he produced all the Barbra Streisand movies, and he was one of the biggest producers. And he was leaving the next morning, he was leaving Jerusalem. His son just committed suicide, so some friend of his took him to, he was a Jewish guy with no interest in Israel, but took him there. And I said, okay, he was leaving at 6 in the morning to fly back to the States, and I went like at 5 in the morning and put in his mail box something that I wrote like a page and a half that was very irreverent. And he called me almost immediately and he said, well, come have breakfast with me right now. So I went and had breakfast with him, and he said, I would like to make a movie along the lines of this thing. Can you write me a treatment? And I said, what is a treatment? So he explained to me, he said, call me collect. I said, I looked it up afterwards in a dictionary to understand what's call me collect. So this book, the first book of mine, started as a movie idea, but Ray Stark showed it to a lot of really famous directors I know because I know. And then all of a sudden one day, he wrote me like about once a week, and then all of a sudden he wrote me, okay, I'm sorry, I can't make it, I'm dropping it, goodbye. And I was shocked. So then I wrote it into a book, and so I was a filmmaker before, I was a would-be filmmaker before I was a novelist, but he introduced me to, he started as a literary agent, not as a producer, in New York. So he introduced me to his ex-partner, and I went and I gave them this book. And after a fairly short time, they found a publisher, so I became a writer.
One of the characteristics of your filmmaking is it is really free from a lot of, free from a lot of things that most people in filmmaking feel that they have to go for. Could you tell us about the pluses and minuses of being self-taught? I mean, not being, autodidact, as we say in French.
Yeah, I was always interested in literature and in films, but I was determined not to study it because in high school when I studied it, I always wrote all kinds of very irreverent things, and they usually failed me. And I said, this is like strange because I felt like I was not a bad writer. So I'm not at all against. I don't think it's a bad thing to study making films, but I never wanted to, learn how to hold a camera and how to change focus and all of those kinds of things. But I realized that a lot of this you can actually just tell. Let's say you tell the DP what kind of shot. You don't have to understand how you make the shot.
Yes.
You tell him, I want it like this. And I learned a lot from experience. And I learned a lot, sorry, from 2 or 3 specific people. Anna Thompson, who was in a lot of my films, told me about Clint Eastwood. She made 2 movies with Clint Eastwood, and she said to me, he never rehearsed, he always shot the first rehearsal. And I was so happy because I couldn't stand the boredom of like sitting days and days and having the actors read and so on. So I skipped that, and then I saw how Woody Allen worked. I was on a set because I was dating somebody who was working with him, and I saw that he sat in the back, and at some point when everybody was ready, he said, "Okay, action," and he let the actors do exact. You know, he always gave them just 1 page or 2 pages. They didn't know what the movie was about, but he just always let them do what they wanted, and then but he had great actors and he had his funny lines and all of this. And then sometimes he said, "Well, do it one more time." But he didn't even tell them what to change. He didn't tell them do it with more energy, with more anger, or with more anything. He just said, "No, let's try it one more time." So it was almost. And the last thing was Fassbinder, that I made a movie with Hannah Shigula, and I took about 7 takes of everything. Didn't matter how good they were, because I was afraid to miss something or that there would be a scratch and a negative. And one day she took me aside and she said, "You know, Fassbinder, when he had the scene, in one shot, in the first shot, he moved on to the next thing. He never covered, he never did all these things." So when I made Sue was the first movie that I applied that. I always basically tried to do it in the first shot and not take a second shot. And almost all the movie is a first shot kind of thing. And once in a while we had to take a second shot. But so those people really had influence on me. The Sumo Wrestler was made in a weird way where a lot of things were improvised and so on. But overall, I usually always wrote my scripts, and let's say a movie like Sue, for instance, it's completely, a lot of people think that it was improvised, but there was not one line that was improvised. It was scripted to the last line, and we just shot that. So I think it had a lot of reality because I knew a lot of women that were a little bit like that, and also Anna Thompson herself had something in her personality, I'm sorry about this, that seemed kind of victimized. So and Sue was obviously a victimized kind of character, but it wasn't intentional.
Is there a special fascination with, say, tragic blondes? I mean, that sort of characters. I mean, that are very, very both strong and with frailties.
I always liked fringe characters because I felt I was a fringe person. I never felt I was part of any group in my entire life, from kindergarten on and high school and school. I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't feel part of it. And so I think part of the reason is I projected myself on those women. And the other thing is that I knew women like that. I was attracted to them, so I knew those kinds of women more than I knew your average kind of housewife or woman who had like a good job as a lawyer or a doctor. So I don't think I could have written, for instance, a script about a doctor who's a woman or a man or anything, because I know nothing about medicine. But fringe characters who get into all kinds of problems and troubles, I knew a lot of those.
Is success a misunderstanding, as some people say? I remember when Atom Egoyan, the Canadian director, hit real success with Exotica, he went totally panicked. What did I do wrong? How did you react when festivals around the world, when France and you embraced your movies? They were released to quite a success, and there was a lot of critical writing about your work, and it happened like suddenly.
Very suddenly.
Very
yeah.
suddenly. So how do you remember it happening, and how do you reflect on the meaning of it?
I was thrilled, you know. I was thrilled because I was relatively an old director then. I'm not going to talk about now because I'm even older, I guess. But no, I had only good feelings. But for instance, 3 days ago when I read about Philip Seymour Hoffman kind of killing himself with, I really started thinking about how a lot of people, and it's not me, but a lot of people who reach tremendous success, they either kill themselves in some way. I mean, there's so many examples. I don't want, or they become their lives become like very hard. You know, I was friendly with Michael Douglas because our parents were friends, and he had a fantastic career. But you know, as a son that's in jail for 10 years for drug trafficking, and I think that it comes partly because his father was so much at work and all that that he never had time for his son. And so I think that you pay a huge price for success.
In your previous movie, your father was in it. Your family in Israel. What about the importance of family and fatherhood? Because it's a theme that comes up more and more in your films.
Yeah, I think when I started with movies, I wanted to get as far away from family as possible. But now I find when I make those movies, I get to understand myself and my parents and my daughters and my wife and all kinds of people like this that you should understand actually. But there was a long time that I was raised in Israel, and I was raised in such a patriotic family that I wanted to just go to New York. You know, I wanted to completely avoid this whole Jewish Zionist thing. But now, you know, my parents are comfortably dead. I can check about them a little bit, like who were those guys?
What was your first, maybe the first film you remember watching? And then what was the first film that made a real big impact on you as well? This is a film, this is magical, this is cinema, and I'm feeling it.
Well, it's two different things. I was actually in Washington, D.C. with one of those characters who was sitting there, and I was a very small kid, and I saw on television some man who seemed to be an important man. I remember he was a blonde, and he was assassinated. And I remember this, I was like about 4 years old. This made a huge impact on me at the time. But afterwards, I don't know. I know that the movies, but this is much later, the movies that made the strongest impact on me were like The Deer Hunter, for instance, and so on. And since I loved Paul Newman, I loved Kula and Luke was one of my. I don't think it's a great movie, but it was one of my favorite movies. I saw it about 18 times, and I knew it by heart. Actually, I could run the whole dialogue, and. But I think Woody Allen really impressed me. I had an uncle who had, I think, maybe a better sense of humor than Woody Allen, but Woody Allen was funny, and I was definitely influenced by, because I had to, my weapon against this horrible world that I lived in from age whatever, 0, I always found like, okay, if I could make a joke out of it, I could get by. And then I also discovered that, because I was so afraid of like picking up a girl, I realized that when I was like doing it like a joke, it was like, if it didn't work, so okay, it was a joke. If it did work, it was like she appreciated my humor, so I couldn't lose in a way. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.